Okay, so what does debriefing do? I have already covered this slide. It basically encourages the learner to reflect. That means to think back as to how they performed. Then they verbalize what they did. That helps to cement it in their minds. Then we go to the next higher level of Bloom's taxonomy of learning, which is analyzing whatever they did, the reasons for why they did it, and then they communicate what they recently experienced. They share with each other, and in the process, a group learning takes place.
If I can say something about this.
Yes, Professor Matt.
Yeah, I think this is a very important point that you have brought up. Is basically which is on the contrary to what a lot of seasoned teachers are doing now. Even though we call it debriefing, but sometimes a lot of them giving a feedback, which is a one-way process, which basically trying to point out to the learners that what are the things that did it wrong. So I think this is one thing which is very important, clear right from the beginning, the differentiation between debriefing, the whole idea of debriefing, and giving just a straight feedback.
Thank you very much. You have anything to add on this, Sabrina?
No.
Okay, then maybe we go on to the next slide.
Okay, so basically, if all of us have done some form of debriefing, we know that this is a process that is commonly done immediately after the simulated scenario. And if you do have another facilitator who will debrief together with you, it will be good to get a quick huddle right after the scenario so that you can strategize during the debriefing and who is to do what. So for our first group of learners who have never done simulation before, it is always good to provide with some ground rules. Some simple rules like, basically focusing and keeping their handprints on silence, and what are your expectations during the debriefing, and maybe a quick overview of what debriefing is all about so that your questions will not catch them by surprise. And this simple ground rules perhaps can also help them to be able and be ready to get engaged and know what is coming. And with that expectation, they are ready to analyze their actions, think about what they want to say, and say it in a more constructive way. And of course, the most important thing is the basic ground rule of what is said in the room, kept within the room. So the debriefing structure and the progression is important for the first timer in this manner.
If I can interrupt, Sabrina, there is some echoing. So if any of the participants are not able to understand, please indicate and we will repeat.
In the debriefing process, as what has mentioned by Dr. Dinka, I think the most important thing to start off with that we just let the participants just vent it out. They need to release from that stressful situation, so they need to de-stress. And in fact, we need to acknowledge the emotions that went through. Well, it all depends on how immersive is the simulation is. And also one important thing is actually, before we start the whole debriefing process, is the thing called de-rolling. We have to basically tell them they are basically now out of the role of whatever they play, to everybody who was involved in this thing, because this can facilitate the learning process, because we don't want to cap the people who is in the simulations is still in the role of that they play in the simulation, because this can be very having negative in terms of the outcome. So often they have vent and edit out. We have de-roll in their back into their usual self. then only I think we should start the debriefing process. And this debriefing process, as one mentioned, there are many methods or there are many techniques that you can use. But whatever it is, actually, this is where we need to see in phases what had happened, what has been done, or what they have done very well. Because I think important thing also to note in any debriefing, not only the negative factor, but one or the good positive factor that they have done is very important for us to acknowledge that. Well, obviously, the thing that they could have done better is that something that we can also, we need to put, we need to stress one of the things that we can learn from that. And don't forget, in all debriefing, we just don't want the process of just talking it out, trying to analyze what they have went through without summarizing. Summarizing is important phase in debriefings, because that is where we basically you tie the knots rather than let it go on astray. And during the summary also, this is where whatever technique that you use, we will try to basically get them to relate on how they can transfer this whatever they have went through to the clinical setting. Now, these are some of the questions that the debriefers can use, basically asking them how do they feel. Now, this is actually a very important, very strong questions, and I want to add in the sense that it is not only how do they feel, but how do they feel right now, which is important after they have went to the whole process of simulations. And we want to see whether the feelings influence in terms of their performance, right? The other thing is actually when we conducting debriefing is actually we can basically lay down what are the things that they have learned previously and what are the things they want to improve when they go through the simulation this time around. And once we have laid down the important things that we want them to learn, and when they arrive to the areas or to the issues that they want to learn, we can go on deeper in trying to asking them or probing them on how they think that they did this time around. And in fact, the other questions like basically like, in fact, not only you can summarize, sometimes you, since it is a learner-led discussion, they can sometimes come up what they have learned. But again, this is have to be verified by the debriefer or the instructors.
Okay, so this next part of the slide compares the role of facilitator and instructor. So I'll use two pictures to indicate the two roles. You can see that one is a picture pointing to a blackboard, and the other one is a compass. So, which is really reflective of what a facilitator does, which the main role is to guide. And a facilitator takes on the student usually towards a more learner-centered focus in a way that the learners are encouraged to get involved and engage. In this case, the learners talk more. The facilitator directs the discussion, but mainly the learners are the ones that just get through the discussion. So the facilitator only provides the structure of how the discussion should be towards the end point. Very often ask open-ended questions so that more elaboration can come from the learner. So pretty much, if you put this all in a debriefing, the structure is kind of loose. So as compared to the instructor teaches. The objectives is very teachers driven, what she needs to accomplish, what the teachers need to cover at the end of the lesson. And the instructor tends to talk more in this case, to control the discussion, and there is a very strict, rigid structure with a list of content to be achieved during the entire session. In a way, the structure is more rigid. so that there's a quick difference between facilitator and instructor. All right, now following this, we are going to share some models for debriefing. And I'm going to start the more basic model, and which is a plus delta model. And plus stands for what we did well, and delta stands for what needs to be improved. So you can see on the list, plus is on one side and delta is on the other side. So as a debriefer, you can jot down notes in a very fast manner. And the focus is mainly on actions, but not too much on the learner's state of mind. Very fast to debrief, and it's very easy. It is very military style. So what's good, what's bad, and then move on. So this is the plus delta. So Dr. Dinker has some more to share.
Yeah. So another type of debriefing that is used is the Calgary-Cambridge Observation Guide. You will see, regardless of the type of debriefing model, the common thread that runs through all of them is very similar. So there will be some repetition or overlap between these different models, but there will be some differences as well. So as far as the Calgary-Cambridge Observation Guide is concerned, you start with the learner's agenda. We should remember that simulation is not a game. It is a serious educational exercise, and as such must be associated with learning outcomes. And these learning outcomes, by and large, going by educational principles today, are driven by learner's agenda. So we look at the outcomes that we're trying to achieve. We have already covered the fact that we encourage the learners to assess themselves and to learn to solve the problems themselves. And it is also important to make sure that everybody in the group is involved in the process. Whenever you have groups and group dynamics, you will find some people are more talkative, others are shyer, they don't speak so much. So it's important as facilitators to recognize these people, the different types of learners, especially through their body language, and try to encourage everybody to participate. Feedback that is provided by the facilitator must be balanced. That means that we should not be overly critical or give negative feedback. This does not necessarily mean that we do not bring up the mistakes that were made, but they have to be brought up in a fashion which makes the learner believe that we are not picking on them, but rather we are helping them to correct their mistakes. Facilitators can certainly make offers and suggestions to guide the debrief. With lower level learners, what I mean by that is people who are not so skilled, not so experienced, like undergraduate medical students, it may sometimes be necessary to go into a teaching mode, but we should minimize that as far as possible. And of course, it's important for the debriefer to rehearse the process of debrief. And it is my experience that, of course, when we run scenarios again and again, we find that the same points crop up during debrief with different groups of learners. So you automatically tend to get better as you go along. And I think the last sentence needs emphasizing again. The facilitator must always be well-intentioned. He must be concerned for the learner. He must be supportive of the learner and make the learner behave and believe that they can make mistakes without being criticized.
The next technique that people have used is called the SHOP technique. It's basically an acronym from the sentence that you've seen here. Well, the SHOP technique, basically, it has a pre-debriefing component and also the component that is done during debriefing. Well, the first thing is actually in SHOP technique is that is to have to set the learning objective. This is basically is being done before the simulations, right? So basically, it is a point where the debriefer have to basically tell them, okay, the whole idea of this simulation is this, or basically, well, basically just read it out to them. So that is basically the whole idea is to get the participation or the participants in the simulation process focus into what actually they're going to do. And then once you have done that, you go to the H, which is basically asking them of how did it go. It's again, it's a process of wanting to know how do they feel in the simulation, the immersiveness of this. Now, as you do the how did it go, that is where we start to gather information of certain issues, and basically we try to address them, especially issues that is related to the learning objective. Okay. And the R is basically stands for review of the learning points. Okay. Now, once we have addressed the concern of the learners, that is basically what they did wrong or what they did all right, so on. We have to basically get back and basically review whether they have achieved the learning objective, which is basically being set on. Okay, whether it has been met, or in terms of the skills, or in terms of the team's dynamics. And the P is the last one, which is the plan ahead. Okay, basically, we would in this process is actually we're trying to make them relate what they have learned during the simulation process back to what they can apply when they're during their working phase. The other technique, which I think a lot of people quite familiar, is the gas technique. Okay, which basically originates from the AHA, which was developed by the group from Weizen and the American Heart. Well, the gas technique is also known as the structured and supported debriefing. Okay, and it is structured because basically it is structured in terms of you have what's the goal and what's the actions that you have to take, and in terms of the time that you have to complete this thing, and it's basically a good way how to deal with or to conduct debriefing. It is supported basically with during the process of debriefing in terms of the algorithm, the work process, and so on. So that's why I think to me personally, I use a lot of the gas technique because it's quite easy for us to basically identify things and basically zoom ahead to what are the things we want the students or the participants to learn. It have also one important thing is actually how much time you should spend. So basically, if you are concerned of time that you have, I think doing a gas technique of debriefing is also is something of an option. Sabrina?
I'm gonna talk about the ask technique that we are showing here. This is called the advocacy inquiry. In short, it is known as AI. So this technique is developed by Jenny Rudolph and her team at the Boston Center for Medical Simulation. Quite a well-known team. Now, basically, this is a technique that to explore what drives the actions of the students, which means what are those meanings behind the actions of the students. So it is driven by three underlying understandings. The first one being the facilitator needs to be curious about what the student is doing and why he's doing that. The facilitators need to advocate against actions against an established structure. And after that, inquire why the student did it. Okay, so in short, it is framed in such a way. For example, I noticed that you were giving oxygen of 2 liters to a COPD patient. This patient has an saturation of 80%. I am concerned because at 8%, according to the oxygen saturation curve, it is not going to allow the patient to sustain oxygenation. What were you thinking at that time? So that is advocacy inquiry. Curiosity, advocacy, and inquiry. Now we find that very often people who use this technique, it is useful to know the meaning of those actions, but many a time it is too time consuming because at any one count of the frame, you can only uncover one frame. So this is absolutely very time consuming. AI is also termed as debriefing using good judgment because it is advocated by a fact or by a current guideline. So in this way, the qualities of the good judgment debriefer is that debriefer share her observation and opinion, and she does not assume, and she uses curiosity to explore the basis of those actions and performance. Right, so that is advocacy inquiry. And I think most of us, when we, whatever technique that we use, apart from the plus delta, we tend to use more of the why question rather than the what question. So that is something that is observed throughout. Right, so at this
Before
point,
we go on, if I may
Yeah,
just interrupt, Ismail, sorry. There was a question about the similarities and differences between the different models of debriefing. So I thought because we've just covered the different types of models of debriefing, we can address that question now. Now, most of these types of debriefing, as I already mentioned, the similarities are that they are all learner driven. It's the learner who's in charge of the learning. The facilitator just guides the students through the debrief. And they don't teach or criticize or look down upon the students, and there should be no negative demeanor. As far as the differences are concerned, some of these models of debrief are more structured than others. For example, Plus Delta is a very structured model of debrief which works within tight framework, whereas the advocacy inquiry is more loose and less structured. Advocacy inquiry, one of the critical elements is the good judgment. That means we tell the student that we observe them making an error, but we say why we are concerned about it, and then what was the idea or what the student was thinking about when they made that error. So that is something that is special to advocacy inquiry. Would any of you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, I mean, the other thing is about sharp technique. This is where I think the technique of debriefing, where you tell the candidates or tell the students what are the learning objective or what are we want to get from them, or what they should learn about this simulation at the end of it. I think this is one thing good about sharp, because it makes things clear, even though there are basically people who have some debate on this thing, whether to tell the students what is the learning objective is, or not to tell the student what is the learning objective until the end. But in sharp technique, you basically lay it down right in front of them at the beginning, before the start of the simulation, so that they will basically able to focus and understand what actually they should get out from the simulations that they're going to go through.
Okay, I think Chayon has a point to say that, which I also made a mention in passing, but worth repeating, that ultimately the debriefing should be guided by the learn outcomes, and it should be within that framework so that there's not too much deviation. Sometimes when we debrief, there is a great deal of temptation to bring up another point or something that a learner brings up which is outside the scope of the learning outcome. It's better to address these issues separately rather than during the course of that particular debrief.
Okay, can we get back? Yes, we get back to the slide. Now, these are some of the tips that I think as facilitators it is good for them to be aware. The first thing is actually, this is where it's really, totally like opposite from the role of a teacher. Because in teaching, as you notice, that from young, you know that most of the talking is being done by the teacher. But in debriefing technique, as facilitator, we listen more rather than what we talk. We ask few important questions that basically able to lead the candidates, or basically that can stimulate, the whole idea to stimulate their thinking process, because we want to know what do they think of a certain things that they have done during this thing. So sometimes just by keeping quiet for a few seconds can do wonders. Okay, the next thing also, we need to be observant to the body language when we do debriefing to the candidates. Again, so we have mentioned just now, when they finish the simulation exercise, we ask them to vent it out. We want them to de-roll their role, but sometimes the feeling of unsecureness, feelings of uneasy, which basically we need to be observant, and we need to try to probe them into this. In terms of group dynamics, I think it's also important for us to look around and how the group is conducting themselves. We don't want to have the two extremes of people, and we're trying to control that. We're trying to basically overcome that, the two extremes, someone who is very dominant, someone very authoritative, who are basically in control of everything, and there's someone who is very quiet. So we as facilitators should observe this, because definitely there will be some candidates who are going to be very quiet at one end and just not contributing at all. We don't even know whether they are with the whole discussion or not. Well, cultural and emotional impact is another thing that I think we need to be aware. Sometimes something that works okay or works well in one country or in one culture might not work well in the other. Example, like when you come into body contact, touching or giving a pat on the back. In most places it will be okay, but in some places which are more conservative, these are the things that should be aware by the facilitators or the debriefers about this thing. Asking questions is fine, but sometimes when we have batteries of questions, which we should not do that. Again, to some culture or to some places is all right. They can take it very nicely, but some don't. Again, jokes is also one of the things. We should allow the candidate to have self-direction, rather where we have to point out everything to them, because everybody have an experience of doing things, and basically we should let them. Okay, rephrasing, reflecting, rewording, echoing what they say sometimes can work, and sometimes can give the positive enforcement to them that they are doing the right thing. So basically, this is basically can also elevate the moods of the participants, and basically making them feel more at ease. Okay, praising and pointing out appropriately is during echoing or reflecting is also an important thing that can be done by facilitators. Expressing empathy and is one thing that we also need to be aware of. Sometimes we ourselves, if we put ourselves in the candidate or the student's shoe, we'll basically have to be, we can feel how stressed and how difficult they are for them to perform this. So expressing empathy to them can again helps the facilitator to put the candidate at ease. Okay. Prevention of some dominating discussions that can basically lead the whole discussion astray to a point that we don't even get to the learning objective. This is one point we need to be aware, that sometimes we stumble to some issues, and some candidates are very dominating the discussion, and they want to go into that. It is okay to let them be, but we also be aware of the timing and basically the concerns of the others. So basically, we try to prevent from such, especially if the issues that's being discussed are not related to the whole learning objective, or the learning objective has not been met at all. So we have to take control of this situation. And also we need to foster assistance for those who are really struggling in other through the simulation or trying to understand the topic that we are discussing about. Dinka.
Okay. Yeah. So I think once we know what are the things that are nice to do, it becomes easy for us to understand what are the things to avoid. One of the obvious things is facilitator becoming an instructor. Unfortunately, the more senior we are and the more experience we have as teachers, the more we tend to make this mistake. It's very difficult for us to step back, go out of the teacher role, and step into a facilitator role. So, you know, it's important, therefore, especially for people with a lot of experience, to be conscious of not making this mistake. A negative demeanor, remember, need not necessarily be only by words where you are criticizing somebody, but it could also be in terms of body language where you slightly turn away from a person, ignore a person's raised hand. People are quick to notice these cues, and if they feel that you're not giving them due respect, they will withdraw from the whole process of discussion. Close ended questions tend to end the discussion very quickly. If you want to have more discussion, then it's better to have open ended discussions. And in the same manner, avoid the temptation to answer questions too quickly. The answers have to come from the learners. And in this respect, I keep on stressing it's very nice to use silence as a good weapon in your armamentarium when you are facilitating. Silence is very uncomfortable for everybody, and somebody will always step into that vacuum and speak up. So if you feel that participants are not participating enough, just stay quiet for a while after putting out a question, and you will automatically feel the responses coming. The last one, of course, being judgmental and condescending, is self explanatory. I have already talked about verbal and non-verbal actions, and we should not be focusing only on the errors, but also giving praise where praise is due.
Just to share my experience, Dinka, if I
Yes,
can.
absolutely.
Yeah, regarding the silence, I just want to echo what you, because previously I was many years ago, I was a non-believer of the silence, but for the last few years I've been trying that, and it works. It works because by remaining silent just for a few seconds, and basically just like uh, letting them coming out, eventually they come up and basically they speak. So for those who are like me previously, who are non-believers of silence, I think why don't you just try them? Back to you.
Okay, I think Dr. Nandini has a statement where she says she is trying to evolve a style that works for her. And I think that's an excellent concept, and it already shows that you have some experience as a debriefer, because we all evolve our own styles of debrief. Though there are different models of debrief, you can combine them. And to my practical experience, I have found that none of us follows rigidly any one particular style of debrief, even within the same debriefing session. We have to be flexible enough to adopt different styles as the time needs, as a need arises.
Two issues here, which is debriefing with video and the second debriefer. So I'm gonna go with the debriefing with video. So I think it's a rule of the thumb for most centers is that you have consent forms for your learners to indicate a preference and also an acknowledgement that they do not mind being videoed. So the rule of the thumb is that the learners must know that you are recording them. So there's often a confidentiality note or a consent. So, but if you want to use video to brief your learners, it is often a good habit to use a video time marker so that when you are playing the video, you will not have to toggle back and forth trying to spend time searching for the right moment that you want to teach. So a video time marker or specific segment marking will be quite good, and sample only the teachable moments, because if you are going to show them the entire video clip, it will be times two of the scenario time, which can be quite expensive. And always remember, when you're playing that video, don't talk, because your learners are never going to focus on what you are saying. So if you want to talk, pause the video. And perhaps it is always good to come up with some policies of archiving the videos and knowing when you want to delete and what are the video clips that you want to keep for research purposes, and be sure that you have consent for those research clips. Okay, over to Prof. Ishmael.
Okay. Sometimes we use a secondary before, or it is good to have someone else to help us in debriefing. And situations where second debriefers comes in very well is basically if we have a we are dealing with complex scenarios where there are multiple tasks that requires detailed observations that we need to give during debriefing. This is where second debriefer can come in very handy and see, because sometimes if we are the only debriefer, sometimes we might miss things. Or the other thing is that actually in terms of if there are multiple objectives to debrief, a second debriefer can help in these things. As you all has you know that second debriefer can also play the role as the content experts during debriefing. They can be the SME or the subject matter experts when we discuss about certain things, and this can basically really enforce the understanding of the learners. Team-based simulations is one thing where you want to see a lot of things going on at the same time. Second debriefer will be very, very good to have there. The other thing is actually second debriefer can also play a role as a scriber. So they can basically take notes and basically document what was happened and during the discussions, and basically come to that issues. And second debriefers also can help the primary debriefer during trying to spot on certain candidates or certain students who are a bit lagging behind or upset. This is basically will be overlooked sometime by the primary debriefer, but second debriefer is there. We can have ideas basically in order to stimulate discussion, especially in the beginning, if there's the second debriefer can come in. So basically, but what is important to me, I think there should be a quick discussion between the first and the second debriefer. What is actually the role of each one of them, or what are the things that they want to do, so that they will not be overlapping, and the second debriefer is very clear of what they are supposed to do. Dinka, you want to add on something about second debriefer?
No, I think you more or less covered the point. Chaoyan had a good point where she said that you sometimes may not have two clinicians available for being a second debriefer, but you must remember this normally debrief is done by a single facilitator, but whenever a second debriefer is available, or when two facilitators are running simulation, then of course both of them will be present in the debrief. And what we are talking about here are the dynamics when two debriefers are actually present.
The other thing that I think we have to be aware about, we have to, pay attention a bit on the second debriefer, is not to have the second debriefer hijacking the whole discussion away and basically running out from what is they supposed to discuss, or the second debriefer become the dominant factor over there. Person, and basically lead the discussion astray to what not to what the simulation is to be, but to what he wants. This is where I think a good communication, a quick huddle between the first and the second debriefer is there, and there also can be also some like cues agreed by both of them. Non-verbal cues is that when the second debriefer should come in, and basically when the second debriefer should basically like remain silent, because the whole debriefing is still the first debriefer is the one who's in charge of starting it, analyzing this thing, and basically summarizing the objective or the facts that we want to get across.
Yeah, it has been my experience that we can actually divide learning outcomes between the two debriefers. That makes it easy for each debriefer to know what exactly he or she is going to debrief at the end of the scenario. So that is one way that we can divide up the tasks. And I think Sabrina in the beginning had already pointed out the fact that the second debriefer can pick out some things which the first debriefer might not have seen because he was so busy doing something else. So it's easier for us to get more information from the simulation session when there are two facilitators there.
I think this is a good time for me to open up the Q&A channel. So remember, use your raise hand function so that I can give you the voice, and I will at the same time run some polls.
I can think of several examples where essentially I used advocacy inquiry. And in fact, the best example was very recently when I went to Mumbai and I ran a simulation workshop over there. There were some areas of concern, but what happened was the way I brought up those areas of concern in the advocacy inquiry format was very much appreciated by the participants. And in fact, they were saying that it was non-judgmental on them, and they were very happy in the way the whole they never felt threatened about the whole thing. So it's when we do point out errors to the participants, as long as we do it with the right tone and with the right purpose, where we state the reason why we are concerned, they understand and they don't feel threatened. Okay, this is a big problem, and I'm familiar with this problem because I have been taking undergraduate simulations for some time, and the group sizes that we get are generally large group sizes. My practice, as Dr. Nandini very well knows, is to have the debriefing groups sitting separately, but at the same time in an open semicircle facing the rest of the group so that the rest of the group does not feel left out. The primary involvement will be still from the debriefing group, but we can sometimes throw out questions or suggestions to the non-debriefing group. And if any of them needs to raise a point or an issue, they can channel it through the debriefer. That way, they are learning from the process of debrief, and at the same time, they are also given some chance to interact. But having said that, it is important not to allow too much leeway for the non-debrief group to take over the discussion, because that may then lead to an issue with the debriefing group not having enough time to have a proper debrief.
Yeah, I mean, just to add on about the size of the group when doing debriefing. Well, I have experience of debriefing a group of 5. I've also experience of debriefing a group of 120 students at one go, and I can say that actually debriefing basically work best if you have a smaller group, like 5 to 10 or 5 to 8. Debriefing a bigger group, I think is to me is really challenging, because you will not be able to get the response, and this especially when we run our disaster simulation exercise, where one group of students of 120, and sometimes it's very difficult to pick. So basically, this is where what I did was that basically ask them to run through the scenario and basically get the opinions of the group. So basically what I did was that of the 120 people, we grouped them into smaller groups. So basically like another group of 10 or 15 taking care of the triage, another group taking care of the treatment, another group taking of the communication, and so on. So basically it's like a group base. I know that this is not the best, but that is the best that we can do at that point in time. Having to debrief of 120, and when you only have like 2 or 3 facilitators to do that. Yeah. How would you do that, Tinker, if this you have a very big group of 100+ students?
I think you brought up a very good point. A lot of debriefing, in fact, need not be facilitator driven. Just allowing groups to come together and discussing amongst each other the issues leads to a very useful debriefing as well. And if you are stuck in a situation where you have too few facilitators and you have a very large group needing debriefs, you can do what you suggested, where you break them up into smaller groups. They discuss the issues amongst themselves, and then we all come together in a plenary where each group can send up one representative, and we can have sort of a debrief of the group debrief.
And I think with regards to large group debriefing, very often this is directed to mass casualty training. And I think it is often good to break down into smaller groups, but not only that, the debriefing needs to be in a bite size of themes such as time factor, resources, response, and treatment. So if you can break down into teams, that will help to direct the debriefing into a more fruitful session without having spending too much time and getting people getting out of track.
Yeah, just the last point on what Choyan was saying. Yes, it's very important to have participants vent their feelings before they start the actual process of debrief. And we had mentioned this in the beginning when we talked about the structure of debrief. Because as long as the emotions are running high, they cannot involve themselves in the debriefing process. And after they have got over that aspect, then we can go on into the nitty-gritty of debrief proper. Yeah, I must add that this is the first time we as a group have done this. So we would be very interested in your critical feedback in order to improve for future.
And I would like to thank everyone who have basically posted questions, which basically help in the running of this webinar. Because if not, it's going to be quite a dull webinar between just three of us talking in the air.
Thank you all for attending. Thank you, Dr. Nandini.
So there will be the next webinar sometime in the first week of March. And that is going to be research focused. And Chao Yan will be the lead. And we hope that we can invite you to come back and join us again